My name is Ava Reynolds, and I'm 32 years old. The night had settled in completely, the only illumination in my office coming from the warm glow of the restaurant lights downstairs. A vintage clock on the wall read 9:00 p.m., its steady ticking the only sound accompanying the muffled laughter and clinking dishes from the last lingering customers. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes drifting to an open magazine on my desk. Entrepreneur of the Year was stamped across the page, and there I was smiling, surrounded by my chefs in the kitchen. A surge of pride washed over me. 3 restaurants, countless loyal customers, a name that actually meant something in the culinary world. This was everything I had worked for. Still, something nagged at me. I refocused on the financial reports in front of me, prepared, as always, by my brother Jake. I scanned through the numbers, my brows knitting together. Something felt off. There were discrepancies, small at first, but growing larger. My gut clenched. Jake had been handling the financials for 4 years. Not because he was the best choice, but because he was family. A lifetime of being overlooked growing up, it had always been Jake first, me second. He was the eldest, the one with limitless potential. My parents never doubted him, despite his constant failures. He barely scraped through school, but they acted like he was destined for greatness. Meanwhile, I excelled. Straight A's, a perfect work ethic. But no matter what I did, my achievements were always brushed aside. At Jake's high school graduation, my parents took hundreds of photos, celebrating like he had conquered the world. When I graduated as valedictorian, my father's only comment was, "You should have worked harder in sports." When I announced I wanted to go to culinary school, they scoffed. "We can't afford your tuition on top of Jake's." Yet, somehow, they had no problem paying for his private university. But I didn't beg. I won a scholarship. I worked my ass off. I trained under the best chefs. And when I opened my first restaurant, I did it with zero help from my family. Ironically, years later, I became Jake's employer. Hiring Jake hadn't been my idea. It was my parents who pleaded with me. "He has a brilliant mind for business," my mother had said. "He just needs the right opportunity." Against my better judgment, I gave him a job. And for a while, I ignored the growing tension, the way he seemed resentful of my success. But lately, the cracks were showing. His work was sloppy, mistakes were increasing, and now, these numbers didn't add up. Tonight, as I packed up my things, a chilling thought settled in my mind. Had Jake been stealing from me? I stepped outside, the crisp November air biting at my skin. The neon sign above Alma, my third restaurant, cast a warm glow onto the sidewalk. For a moment, I allowed myself to take it in. This was mine, built from nothing but my own effort, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. The next morning, I pored over the financial reports again, this time with a sharper eye. The pattern became clearer, a series of unexplained withdrawals labeled management fees. Small amounts at first, but increasing significantly in the past few months. My phone buzzed, shaking me from my thoughts. It was my cousin, Lena. "Hey, Ava, I missed you at Jake's wedding last weekend." I frowned. "Last weekend?" "Yeah, it was a beautiful ceremony. Just close friends and family. I thought you were busy with work." I felt the blood drain from my face. Jake had told me the wedding was next weekend. A sick feeling twisted in my stomach. I hung up and immediately dialed my mother. She answered on the first ring, her voice light, casual. "Mom," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "Was Jake's wedding last weekend?" "Oh." There was a pause. Then, with forced nonchalance, she added, "Did we tell you the wrong date?" It was a small thing, nothing grand. A lie. A deliberate exclusion. A wave of cold, burning anger surged through me. Out of all the relatives, I was the only one who got the wrong date? "Don't be dramatic, Ava," she sighed. "You're always so busy with work. We didn't want to bother you." At that moment, everything became crystal clear. No matter how much I achieved, no matter how successful I became, I would always be an outsider in my own family. But what they didn't realize was that this time, I wasn't going to stay silent. The anger simmered beneath my skin long after I hung up the phone. Jake's wedding had happened without me. They hadn't forgotten to tell me. They had chosen to exclude me. I stared at the financial reports spread across my desk, my vision unfocused. Betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined. It wasn't just about the money anymore. This was a pattern, years of being pushed aside, dismissed, treated as an afterthought. I took a deep breath, forcing my mind back to the numbers. I had already noticed suspicious withdrawals, but now, with my emotions sharper than ever, I saw more. Payments to consultants I had never hired, expenses that didn't match our operations, fictitious vendor names. Jake had been siphoning money from my company. My hands clenched into fists. I had trusted him, given him a job when no one else would, and this was how he repaid me? I grabbed my phone and dialed his number. It rang once, twice. Then he picked up. "Hey, Ava, what's up?" His voice was smooth, too casual. I gritted my teeth. "Why didn't you tell me your wedding was last weekend?" A pause, then a forced chuckle. "Oh, man. Did Mom mess up the dates again? I totally thought you knew. Liar. You could have called Jake." My voice was steady, but ice cold. "I figured you were busy," he said dismissively. Besides, it was a small thing, just close family and friends. Close family. And yet, I wasn't there. I inhaled sharply. "Let's talk about the financial reports." Another pause. Longer this time. "What about them?" His voice lost its casual edge. "There are inconsistencies," I said, flipping through the pages. Thousands of dollars in management fees, fake consultant payments, suspicious withdrawals. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Silence. Then a nervous laugh. "Ava, come on. I handle the books, remember? You know how accounting is. Some things just get miscategorized." "Miscategorized?" I repeated. "Jake, this isn't rounding errors. This is fraud." His tone shifted, growing defensive. "You're overreacting. Maybe you're tired. Running a business is stressful, and numbers can look weird when you overanalyze them. I had enough. We'll talk in person. Be at my office tomorrow. 9 a.m. sharp." I hung up before he could argue. The next morning, I arrived at Alma earlier than usual. If Jake thought he could talk his way out of this, he was in for a rude awakening. By 9:30 a.m., he still hadn't shown up. Typical. Always late, always careless. At 9:45, the office door swung open. Jake strolled in, coffee in hand, with a smirk that made my blood boil. "Morning, sis," he said, as if nothing was wrong. I didn't return the greeting. Instead, I slid the financial reports across the desk. "Explain these." He sighed dramatically. "Ava, really? You're getting all worked up over some numbers?" "Those numbers," I said sharply, "show that you've been stealing from me." His smirk faltered. "That's a strong accusation." "It's not an accusation," I snapped. "It's a fact. You've been withdrawing money under false pretenses. You've been sending payments to yourself under fake company names. And the worst part? You stole the money I was sending to Mom and Dad and made it look like it was coming from you." For the first time, real panic flickered across his face. "That's," I called them. I interrupted. "Mom confirmed it. She actually thinks you manage my company. She thinks I'm just one of the chefs." Jake swallowed hard, but he recovered quickly. "Look, Ava, this is all a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I let out a hollow laugh. "Jake, you stole from me. You lied to our parents. And then you had the audacity to exclude me from your wedding." His expression hardened. "You've always been dramatic, always playing the victim." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "And you've always been a parasite." His face twisted in anger. "I did it for the family." "Mom and Dad needed help, and you were too busy playing business mogul to care." I exhaled slowly, reining in my rage. "You could have just asked me, Jake. I would have helped. But you didn't ask, you stole." For a moment, his jaw clenched. Then he scoffed. "What are you going to do? Fire me?" I smiled. A slow, deliberate, victorious smile. "No," I said. "I already did. As of this morning, you're officially terminated." His smirk vanished. "You can't do that." "I can," I said. And I did. I slid another document toward him. "That's a legal notice. You have 1 week to return every cent you stole. If you don't, I press charges." His hands trembled as he picked up the paper. "Ava, come on. We're family." I tilted my head. "Funny. You didn't seem to remember that when you left me out of your wedding. His face turned red. You're really gonna do this? I nodded. Yes, I am. He stood abruptly, knocking his coffee over in the process. Fine, you want to act like this? Go ahead. But don't come crying to me when you realize you just destroyed your own family. With that, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I closed my eyes and exhaled. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from relief. For the first time in my life, I had drawn the line, and I had no intention of erasing it. That evening, the restaurant was bustling, but my mind was elsewhere. I had taken the first step. The next would be ensuring Jake faced the consequences. I spent hours combing through financial records, collecting every piece of evidence. By midnight, I had a folder packed with undeniable proof. Then I did something I should have done long ago. I called my lawyer. It's an emergency, I said. I need to meet first thing tomorrow. I wasn't just cutting ties with Jake. I was making sure he never had the chance to do this to me or anyone else ever again. The next morning, I arrived at my lawyer's office, a thick folder of evidence clutched in my hands. It was time to put an end to this. Nathan Carmichael had been my legal counsel since I first started in the restaurant industry. A sharp, no-nonsense kind of guy, he had guided me through contracts, business expansions, and now family betrayal. He took the folder from me, flipping through the pages with a critical eye. Damn, Ava, he muttered, shaking his head. Your brother really thought he could get away with this? I exhaled. For years, Jake has believed there are no consequences for his actions. I'm about to change that. Nathan nodded. You have more than enough evidence. We can file criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. If he refuses to pay back what he stole, we escalate. Hearing it put so plainly sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just an argument between siblings anymore. It was a legal battle. He closed the folder. I'll handle the filings. In the meantime, I suggest you freeze all company accounts and change passwords. Cut off any access he still has. I nodded, determination settling deep in my bones. Jake had stolen from me. He had excluded me. He had lied to our parents. And now, he was going to face the consequences. That afternoon, I sat in my office, watching the security feeds as my new financial manager, Evan, worked through Jake's old files, every transaction, every false claim, every missing cent. The restaurant bustled downstairs, customers laughing, glasses clinking. But I wasn't celebrating, not yet. Not until this was over. Then my phone rang. Mom. I sighed before answering. Hello. Ava, she started, her voice tight. I just got a call from Jake. He said you fired him. I leaned back in my chair. That's correct. Silence. Then, a sharp inhale. How could you do this to your own brother? I let out a dry laugh. How could he do this to me? You know he's been struggling, Ava. He just got married. He's trying to start a family, Mom. I interrupted, my voice dangerously calm. Jake stole from me. He's been stealing for years. She scoffed. He was just trying to help us out. You're successful, you have plenty. What's a little money to you? I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. There it was. The same justification, the same excuse. Jake could do no wrong. It wasn't just a little money, I said flatly. It was over $100,000. Silence. Then, she said the words that cemented everything. Well, if you really loved your family, you'd let it go. My heart went cold. Nathan is filing charges tomorrow, I said. If Jake doesn't pay back every cent, he'll be facing a court date. Ava, she snapped, voice shrill. You can't do this. You're tearing this family apart. No, Mom, I whispered. You did that a long time ago. Then I hung up. By evening, I had changed every company password, frozen all accounts, and locked Jake out of every system. That was when he showed up. It was late. The restaurant had already closed. I was alone in my office, finishing up paperwork, when a loud knock echoed through the door. I knew who it was before I even stood up. Opening the door, I found Jake standing there, his face red, his fists clenched. He looked furious. Let me in, he demanded. I crossed my arms. Why? Because we need to talk, he growled. You think you can just cut me out like this? You think you can ruin my life and walk away? I held his gaze. I didn't ruin your life, Jake. You did. His jaw tightened. This is about the money, isn't it? Fine, I'll pay you back. I raised an eyebrow. Oh? With what money? He faltered. I'll get it. I leaned against the doorframe. You mean you'll ask Mom and Dad for it? His face darkened. You don't have it, Jake, I said quietly. You never did. That's why you stole from me. His hands trembled at his sides. This is all because of you. He spat. You always had to be the best. You always had to be perfect, Ava, while I was nothing. I exhaled. No, Jake. You were never nothing. But you made yourself this way. He scoffed. You think you're better than me? No, I said honestly. But I am done with you. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. But then his anger cracked, giving way to something else. Fear. You're really pressing charges? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. Yes. His eyes darted away. If I lose my job, Candace will leave me. I tilted my head. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you stole from me. His lips curled in frustration. You'll regret this, Ava. One day you'll look around and realize you have no one. I stepped back and shut the door in his face. The next morning, Nathan filed the paperwork. Fraud. Embezzlement. Misuse of company funds. It was official. Jake had one chance: pay back the money or go to court. Mom called twice more. I didn't answer. Days passed. The restaurant ran smoother than ever with Jake gone. Evan found even more discrepancies in the books Jake had been stealing more than I realized. Then, one evening, I got a text from an unknown number. Candace left me. Mom and Dad won't help. Hope you're happy. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Weeks passed. The case against Jake moved forward. Without money or support, he was left to fend for himself. And me? I was finally focusing on what mattered: my future. Alma was thriving. My fourth restaurant was already in the works. No more distractions. No more betrayals. I had built my empire on my own, and I would continue standing without them. The days after filing charges against Jake were eerily quiet. No phone calls from my parents. No desperate texts from my brother. Silence. At first, I expected some last-ditch attempt to manipulate me. Maybe Mom would call and beg. Maybe Dad would send one of his classic "you're overreacting" emails. But the silence stretched, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like relief. I poured myself into work. Alma was thriving, my staff more motivated than ever. Evan, my new financial manager, continued combing through records, uncovering more of Jake's deceit. Every day, another misallocated expense, another theft hidden under a vague label. This goes deeper than I thought, Evan said one evening, handing me a report. He wasn't just stealing, he was funneling money into personal accounts under different names. There's enough evidence here to make sure he never works in finance again. I stared at the numbers, the proof of my brother's betrayal laid bare. I should have felt angry, but instead, all I felt was certainty. There was no going back from this. Jake had made his choices. One evening, after a long shift, I was locking up when I noticed a figure standing near the restaurant's entrance. Mom. She looked smaller than I remembered, wrapped in a long coat, her hands gripping the strap of her purse. She had never come to my restaurant before. Not once. I hesitated. Then, with a resigned sigh, I walked over. What do you want, Mom? She turned, her face tired. We need to talk. I crossed my arms. I doubt there's anything left to say. She sighed. Jake's in a bad place. I gave a short laugh. You don't say. Her gaze hardened. Ava, this isn't a joke. Candace left him. He's out of money. And now, with the charges you filed, he did this to himself, I interrupted. Mom flinched but pressed on. He made mistakes, but he's still your brother. Do you really want to see him in prison? I exhaled sharply. I wanted to see him not steal from me. I wanted to see him treat me like family, but he didn't. She looked away. He was always under pressure, Ava. Your father and I, she trailed off, then shook her head. You were always so independent. We knew you'd be fine. But Jake, he needed help. I stared at her, stunned. So, that's your excuse? You ignored me because you thought I didn't need you? She shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't like that. Then how was it? I challenged. You let him take advantage of me. You let him steal. You let him shut me out of his own wedding. And you said nothing. She swallowed. We didn't know about the money. But you knew about everything else, I shot back. And you let it happen. Her face crumpled. We thought he'd grow out of it. I shook my head, disbelief coursing through me. You're still making excuses for him. She took a step closer. Ava, please, drop the charges. He's lost everything. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw my mother not as a force I had to fight against, but as a woman who had failed in ways she could never fix. And I realized something. I didn't need her validation anymore. I let out a slow breath. No, Mom. The charges stand. Her lips trembled. Then you're no longer part of this family. I gave her a small, sad smile. I never was. Then, without another word, I turned and walked away. I didn't cry. I didn't second-guess myself. For the first time in my life, I felt weightless. The next morning, Evan walked into my office, a small smile on his face. You're going to want to see this. He placed a printed article on my desk. Local business owner pursues legal action against fraudulent accountant. Jake's name was right there in the headlines. My stomach twisted, not with guilt, not with regret, but with finality. It was out in the open now. No more pretending, no more hiding. I picked up my phone and dialed Nathan. Let's move forward with the case. A week later, I was locking up Alma when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Jake. His face was gaunt, his clothes wrinkled. He looked nothing like the brother I had grown up with. He looked lost. Ava, he said, his voice hoarse. Please, just listen. I crossed my arms. I have nothing left to say to you. He swallowed hard. I messed up. I know that. But I need you to drop the charges. I tilted my head. And why would I do that? His jaw clenched. Because I'm your brother. I let out a humorless laugh. That didn't seem to matter when you were stealing from me. He exhaled sharply. I was desperate. He hesitated. I was drowning, Ava. Candace wanted this perfect life, and I couldn't give it to her. I thought if I just had a little more time, I could fix it. I studied him. For the first time, he wasn't making excuses. But it didn't change anything. Jake, I said quietly, I would have helped you if you had just been honest with me. His eyes glistened. I didn't know how. I nodded, more to myself than to him. That's the problem, isn't it? He took a shaky breath. So, this is it? I didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. Jake had already lost me a long time ago. He lowered his head, then turned and walked away. I watched him go, the weight of the past lifting with every step he took. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was free. The lawsuit went forward. Jake had no defense. He was found guilty of embezzlement and fraud. He avoided prison by agreeing to full restitution, but it would take him years to pay it all back. Mom and Dad never reached out again. And I thrived. With Jake gone, my restaurants flourished. I opened a 4th location, then a 5th. For the first time in my life, I wasn't weighed down by the past. One evening, standing outside Alma, I looked up at the glowing sign. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was proof that I had built my life on my own. And I had won, not by revenge, not by hatred, but by choosing myself. And I would never choose anything less again. Months passed. The storm had settled. Jake was gone from my life, legally bound to repay what he had stolen. My parents had cut me off, though I suspected they were too ashamed to reach out, knowing how much they had enabled him. And yet, I was okay. Better than okay. Alma was thriving. My 4th restaurant was weeks away from opening. I had hired new staff, streamlined operations, and for the first time in years, I felt in control. Not just of my business, but of my life. No more compromises. No more pretending. And still, on some nights, when the restaurant had closed and the world was quiet, I would feel it. The loneliness. Not regret. Not guilt. Just a quiet awareness of everything I had lost. Or maybe, everything I had let go. One evening, after a long day of meetings and menu planning, I finally collapsed onto my couch, phone in hand. As I scrolled through unread emails and business reports, a notification popped up. Unknown number, hey Ava, it's Candace. I sat up. Candace? I hadn't heard from her since Jake's downfall. As far as I knew, she had left him the moment his finances crumbled. Me? Why are you texting me? A few moments passed before she replied. Candace, I thought you should know. Jake's not doing well. I exhaled sharply. And why would she think I cared? Me. That's not my problem. She didn't respond immediately. But when she did, it was longer than I expected. Candace, I know. But he's been staying with some friends, bouncing from couch to couch. He has nothing left, Ava. He's drinking a lot, saying crazy things. I'm just worried he might do something stupid. I clenched my jaw. Of course. Another attempt to drag me back in. Me. He's an adult. He makes his own choices. I nearly put the phone down, but her next message stopped me. Candace. He blames you for everything. My stomach tightened. Me. He blames me for getting caught. Her reply came almost instantly. Candace, maybe. But I've never seen him like this before. He's unraveling. I stared at the screen, debating whether to even acknowledge it. I owed Jake nothing. He had betrayed me, stolen from me, humiliated me, and now he was suffering the consequences of his own actions. Wasn't this what he deserved? So why did I feel uneasy? The next day, I met with Lena, my cousin, for lunch. She had been one of the few family members who had always supported me, even after my parents had turned their backs. Candace texted me last night, I said as we sat at an outdoor cafe. Lena raised an eyebrow. That's random. She said Jake is spiraling, I continued. Drinking, bouncing between friends' places, blaming me for everything. Lena sighed, stirring her coffee. That sounds about right. I looked at her. Do you think I should care? She exhaled slowly. Honestly? No. You did everything you could for him, Ava, more than anyone else ever did. And when he had the chance to do right by you, he threw it away. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. But, she added, that doesn't mean you won't feel something about it. He's still your brother, even if he was a terrible one. I sat back, processing her words. So, what? Am I supposed to save him? Lena shook her head. No, he has to save himself. But maybe you need to decide if you want to make peace with it. I hated that she was right. That evening, I found myself parked outside an unfamiliar apartment complex. Candace had given me an address, though I had never promised I would use it. But here I was. Jake's so-called friend let me in without question. The place was messy, dimly lit, and reeked of stale alcohol. And there, on a worn-out couch, was Jake. I barely recognized him. His face was unshaven, dark circles under his eyes. His clothes were wrinkled, his posture slouched. This was a broken man. His bloodshot eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw something flicker, shock maybe, or shame. Ava, he muttered, sitting up slowly. What are you doing here? I crossed my arms. Candace told me you were falling apart. He let out a dry laugh. Guess she still cares a little. I studied him. Do you? He frowned. What do you mean? I gestured around the room. Do you care? About yourself? About fixing this? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for a half-empty beer bottle on the table, turning it in his hands. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. Everything's gone. I sighed. Jake, you had so many chances. You had everything handed to you, and you still threw it away. I know. He closed his eyes for a moment. I thought I could get away with it, that you'd just let it go, like Mom and Dad always did. I swallowed hard. I'm not them, he nodded. Yeah, I get that now. A heavy silence filled the room. For a brief second, I saw the brother I used to know, the one from before everything went wrong. I didn't forgive him. I wasn't sure I ever would. But for the first time, I realized something important. Jake wasn't my responsibility anymore. I had spent my whole life trying to prove myself, trying to earn love from a family that would never give it. But love shouldn't have to be earned. And I was done chasing it. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. Nathan sent this, I said, tossing it onto the table. It's a revised payment plan. If you stick to it, you'll stay out of jail. Jake stared at it. And if I don't? I shrugged. Not my problem. He looked at me, then really looked at me. You're done with me, aren't you? I exhaled. Yeah, I am. Another long silence. Then, finally, he nodded. Okay. And with that, I turned and walked away. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilt. I just felt free. For years, I had let my family's neglect weigh me down. I had fought for a place in their world, only to realize I had built my own. And my world? It was better. I stepped outside, inhaling the crisp night air. The sky stretched above me, vast and endless. There was nothing holding me back anymore. For the first time in my life, I was choosing me. And it felt damn good. The weeks after my last meeting with Jake were unexpectedly quiet. No more desperate messages. No late-night calls from my mother. No news of Jake trying to manipulate his way out of the mess he had created. For the first time, my life was truly mine. Alma continued to thrive, and my fourth restaurant's grand opening was just around the corner. Investors were reaching out, eager to partner with me. I had finally reached the place I had fought so hard to get to, and yet, in the stillness of my success, I found myself reflecting. Not with regret, not with longing, just understanding. Everything I had been through the years of being overlooked, the betrayal, the fights, the final severance had all shaped me into who I was now. And I liked who I had become. One afternoon, as I was finalizing plans for the new restaurant, a letter arrived at my office. It was from Jake. For a long moment, I just stared at it. I could have tossed it in the trash, ignored it like I had ignored his problems for years. But something in me wanted to know what he had to say. Carefully, the first opened the envelope. The letter was short, written in Jake's messy scrawl. Ava, I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm not even sure I deserve it, but I wanted to say something I should have said a long time ago. You were right, about everything. I spent my whole life believing I was owed something. That I deserved more, simply because I existed. When things didn't go my way, I blamed everyone but myself. Especially you. You didn't ruin me. You just stopped saving me. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to fix the damage I caused, but I'm going to try. Not for you, not for Mom and Dad, for myself. Take care. Jake the first read it twice, then a third time. Not an apology, not really, but it was the closest thing to accountability I had ever seen from him. And that was enough. I folded the letter and tucked it away, not because I needed it, but because it marked the end of something. The grand opening of my fourth restaurant was a massive success. The place was packed, the energy electric. People raved about the menu, the atmosphere, the story behind it all. And me? I felt light, not because of the success, not because of the recognition, but because I had finally let go of the weight of my past. I had spent my entire life proving myself to people who had never seen me, fighting for scraps of love that should have been given freely. But I didn't need to fight anymore. I had built something beautiful, not for them, not to prove anything, just for me. One evening, months later, I found myself standing outside my parents' house. I hadn't been back since everything fell apart. I wasn't here to reconcile. I had made peace with the fact that some relationships couldn't be repaired. But I needed to say goodbye, not to them, but to the past version of me who had spent her whole life waiting to be chosen. I took a deep breath and turned away. As I walked back to my car, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And that was enough. Story 2, since I built this basement with great care, nobody would ever find out, right? I appreciate you setting up this beautiful space. Only for me. I was at a loss for words when I heard a young woman's loving voice and Eric's response. What's going on? My thoughts were jumbled and unable to focus when the sound of a woman's high-pitched voice, accompanied by sighs, suddenly filled the corridor. No, it isn't possible. Incredibly so. I suspected something was wrong with my husband's recent actions, but after witnessing it for myself, I was more surprised than I had thought. Jennifer, you have my undying love. Eric, I'm overjoyed. I also adore you. It sounded as though fate was holding the two together as they affirmed their love for one another. Who would have thought that my husband would be having an affair with a stranger in the basement of our new house? I closed the basement door silently after clasping my shaking hands in front of my chest. I considered what I should do desperately. My name is Kelly Simpson, and I'm 31. I work for a firm that produces websites. This has been my specialty since I was a small child. Therefore, I was overjoyed to secure a position at the online production firm of my dreams. The majority of my coworkers are from the same generation, and the firm was just established 20 years ago. This creates a vibrant and peaceful work environment where I may enjoy rewarding days with amazing coworkers. I'm lucky to be employed in my dream job. In my personal life, I am also fortunate. About a year ago, I got married to Eric Simpson, who is 2 years older than myself. I had begun to worry about marriage as I approached my 30s, but after 2 years of dating and meeting Eric at a mixer, we were married. He was like a hero to me, who was ready to get married, lending a helping hand. Although we presently rent an apartment, Eric, who created our ideal home from the ground up, intends to finish it shortly. Although building a house less than a year after our marriage might seem premature, Eric had always intended to purchase a home before the age of 30. He said that he couldn't forget the surroundings in which he was raised when I questioned why. Located in a posh neighborhood, Eric's family house is a large mansion with an opulent facade and interior that appeals to everyone who was raised there. In addition, he wants a house like his parents as soon as feasible. My in-laws' house is the first thing that springs to mind when I envision our future residence. At Simpson Corporation, a significant trade corporation, Eric's father serves as president. His father's pay must be unthinkably high, as the average yearly bonus for regular employees is reportedly $100. Oh. I'm not quite sure, but at least Eric was born into an affluent family and had an easy upbringing as an only child. One could argue that he was a spoiled boy who grew up in a greenhouse, if I may be a little critical. Not every youngster from affluent homes is like that, but based on Eric's actions, I frequently feel that way. He talked about his family's money and the affluent upbringing he had from the first time we met at the mixer, taking pleasure in the participants' responses. He will ultimately succeed him as Simpson Corporation's president if all goes according to plan. It makes sense that he would feel proud. So I wasn't worried about it. Instead, I was concerned about whether I could ever date and get married because I had always been timid about relationships. Thus, it was a blessing to meet him. From becoming romantically involved and getting married to clicking at the mixer, everything went according to plan, and my new life with the rather conceited and self-centered Eric was going great. Additionally, I feel overwhelmed and wary even though my in-laws, who live in a large, opulent home and are quite sincere and morally upright, treat me with respect whenever I visit them. I don't consider interacting with them to be a burden, though, because they are now my family. Eric initially mentioned our ideal house 3 months after we were married. I've been considering purchasing our ideal house shortly. Kelly, what are your thoughts? You always said that owning a home at a young age was your desire. We've only been married for 3 months, but I'm all with it if that's what you want. His idea didn't come as a surprise because I had heard that he had always wanted to construct a house, and I was on board and ready to help. Thank you. After that, I'll get in touch with an architect who knows my dad. I believe he will soon be able to advise us. Yes. I'll let you do it. Go ahead, please. I instantly agreed with a smile since Eric seemed happy to advance the discussion. But I had no idea at the time that owning the ideal house Eric described would turn out to be a big problem. As everything went according to plan, I gave Eric a condition regarding the house mortgage, taking into account both of our incomes. What if you pay 60% of the payments and I pay 40%? Eric said, of course, with a smile and a nod when I asked. In actuality, it would make more sense for Eric to take on a larger share based solely on income. However, I wanted to take charge of our new house since I was a working woman on my own. I therefore suggested this distribution option. However, there might be issues if something were to happen if the mortgage were in joint names. Thus, as an active employee and future president of Simpson Corporation, Eric's name was added to the mortgage. Having the mortgage in his name was logical. The specifics of the mortgage didn't seem to interest Eric, quickly accepting my terms and the name, after which they began discussing the house's layout and exterior. How about making the staircase leading from the living room to the second floor, a spiral staircase, and having an open floor plan? It's nice to have a sense of openness, isn't it? Also, building up to the third floor would be a waste because it would cost more for things like exterior painting, so it would be better to have a basement. I agree with the open floor plan, but a basement is a bit unusual, isn't it? The word basement didn't quite fit the atmosphere of the house. Eric was describing, and I was momentarily puzzled. It saves money compared to constructing up, and a basement might be handy in case of emergency. I'm intending to use it as a bedroom for now, but if you don't like it, we can put the bedroom on the second story and use the basement as a storage area. I was just startled since I didn't believe you would be keen about having a basement. I had a tiny uneasiness with the idea that a basement was a given, but I figured it was simply one of his preferences. Besides, as he mentioned, having a basement may truly be beneficial for storage space, so I consented to it. Although it might be strange for a woman, I'm not very interested in developing layouts from scratch. Therefore, I had no difficulty letting Eric make all the decisions when I agreed to incorporate a basement. Eric's eyes appeared to shine even more. It looked that he genuinely desired a basement. I thought him quite intriguing when he talked about his desire for our ideal home. He continued to visit the architectural company many times, perfecting the floor layout via trial and error. I accompanied him when I could, but frequently work cropped up abruptly on weekends, and there were days I couldn't accompany him. However, Eric didn't seem to bother when I couldn't join the meetings. On the contrary, he was thrilled that all his suggestions were being executed and always came back satisfied. "How did the meeting go?" I said to Eric. "Yes, everything is proceeding without a hitch. I am so excited for our dream home," he said. His eyes gleamed. He appeared to be looking forward to our new house, which was eventually finished a few months later. Eric's demands from the architect's instructions appeared to have been given priority by the contractor. I was really appreciative of the construction crew. The recently finished home had a sophisticated color palette and a respectable yet fashionable design. Even I, who isn't very picky about homes, was impressed by the finished house even though I had been to the site many times during construction. Happy and ecstatic. After examining our new house in detail, Eric used his smartphone to snap a number of pictures from different perspectives. However, Eric's return time from work started to increase later as soon as the new house was finished. "It's a hectic time of year." He rubbed his hands together regretfully and added, "Don't worry about dinner, I'll be coming home late for a while." As I observed him, I was certain that, as the heir to Simpson Corporation, he was genuinely overburdened with work. Eric is responsible for more than just running a business. His father, the president, is undoubtedly also teaching him the ins and outs of running the business. "Are you all right?" I warned him, worried. "Don't go overboard." His return times really grew later after that day. At work, I also have busy times. However, I don't currently arrive home as late as Eric does. I make sure the house is always pleasant for Eric, who is constantly very busy, but I started to get a steadily rising uneasiness. When he did come home early, it was unusual. He would genuinely look through his smartphone to find equipment and furniture that would fit our new house. I was wondering about this bed and storage shelf at one of these instances. They would look great in our new house, in my opinion. The bed and storage shelf in the photo were much too big for the two of us. We are not the kind to hoard. I thus questioned why we would want such enormous furnishings at this time. Although the design is good, why go with something so large? When I inquired, Eric's once enthusiastic countenance abruptly became sour. "If our family develops properly, we may require it. It's preferable to have something larger since bigger covers little, correct? Growing a family most likely meant having kids. It was then that I became aware of something. I hadn't had any personal relations with Eric lately. In retrospect, this all began when Eric started to insist on having a basement in our new house. A newlywed couple going months without intercourse is odd. What hadn't seemed like a major matter before felt like a massive problem after I realized it. And one evening, I plucked up the guts to discuss our marriage life's increasing estrangement. "Perhaps we could at some point, Eric." I attempted to communicate it through the atmosphere because it was awkward to do it directly. "I apologize, I'm simply too exhausted today. We'll choose another day." With a nonchalant nod, he quickly wrapped a blanket around himself. It was unexpected, turned down. Even though it was my first time getting engaged and by my new spouse, at that. There could have been a more kind way to say no, and questions about his sentiments started to surface. At first, it was Eric who took the initiative to suppress his emotions. That night, I discreetly let out a breath in bed and went to sleep. Since then, Eric has not given any initiations, and he has been returning from work even later. He was eager to equip our new house, though, and the new furniture he got online is still arriving this weekend. We are planning to move into our new house. Accordingly, he was contentedly buying new furnishings on the internet by himself. The day of our relocation finally arrived, along with the weekend. Early in the morning, we received messages from both of our parents confirming the day's transfer and expressing great curiosity in our new residence. Eric went ahead to the new house to supervise the shifting of furniture and other belongings, while I remained at the old house to supervise the packing. He departed with the keys to the new house and added, "I'll wait for you at our new home." "Sure, please." My heart skipped a beat when I considered beginning our new life in the immaculately completed new house. The movers soon showed up and got to work packing the boxes onto the truck. I considered beginning a new, happy life with Eric in our new house as I watched the boxes slowly vanish. We'll go on to the next house now that all the boxes have been loaded. Thank you. Once the truck has been sent to the new residence, kindly continue to take care of everything. Out of appreciation, I cleaned the room where we had resided and snapped a picture of the empty space as a memento. I should best go to the new house as well. It's about time to take the one train ride to the new residence. Get out of here. I picked up my luggage and went outside to walk to the closest station. My cell phone rang. The movers, who ought to have arrived at the new house by now, called. "We've reached your new residence, but the doors are locked and the doorbell is unanswered, preventing us from entering." What? Eric should be at the doorbell, so it's odd that nobody answers. My hubby ought to be inside. He may have simply gone to the bathroom. Would you mind ringing once more? I offered, and over the phone I heard them ring the doorbell once again. I apologize, but it appears that no one is here despite our repeated attempts. This was the uneasy response. I get it. I'm now traveling there and should be there in 15 minutes or so. Would you mind holding out for me? I hurried to the new house and requested them to wait until I got there because ringing the doorbell repeatedly didn't work. Eric could have gone out someplace, I thought. But I had no idea what a startling scenario was in store for me. One stop away after disembarking from the train, I rushed to the new residence. The movers were still waiting in front of the entry when they arrived at the house with the black walls. The same as before. I sincerely apologize for keeping you waiting. I will immediately open the door. I'm feeling sorry. I opened the front door hastily. There were no shoes at the door for Eric. Verify that he had left. He went out during the move, which surprised me. He could have at least told me, even if he had urgent business. I kept guiding the movers in spite of my irritation. Where to put the furniture? Now every item has been brought in. We appreciate your use of our service, they cheerfully told me, and I once more apologized and thanked them. Are you feeling worn out? Since I wasn't sure what to do with the boxes that weren't yet assigned to a storage location, I made the decision to begin unpacking the boxes. The basement came back to me. We had previously discussed, correct? At least the living room will be neat if I temporarily move them to the basement. Maybe I should put these there for now. I carried a few lighter boxes down the stairs to the basement, just as I was about to open the basement door. I heard a noise inside and startled. I stepped back and listened closely. There were sounds of movement inside, startled, and my heart pounding loudly. I took a deep breath to calm myself as I slightly opened the door. Light spilled into the hallway, and I gasped. I couldn't see completely inside, but the mere thought of what was happening inside made my spine chill and my body tremble. Since I built this basement with great care, nobody would ever find out, right? I appreciate you setting up this beautiful space. Only for me. I was stunned when I heard Eric's reaction and a young woman's loving voice. What's going on? I couldn't think since my head was in a mess. Abruptly, a woman's high-pitched voice filled with sighs reverberated across the corridor. No, it isn't possible. Incredibly so. I suspected something was wrong with my husband's recent actions, but after witnessing it for myself, I was more surprised than I had thought. Jennifer, you have my undying love. Eric, I'm overjoyed. I also adore you. It sounded as though fate was holding the two together as they affirmed their love for one another. Who would have thought that my husband would be having an affair with a stranger in the basement of our new house? After putting my shaking hands together in front of my chest, I silently shut and secured the cellar door. Frantically, I pondered my next course of action. Just now, did you hear a noise? You must be imagining it, or maybe the movers are to blame. Maybe. Astounded by their audacity to commit adultery in the basement on moving day, Eric and the lady appeared to notice the slight noise I made, but showed no signs of leaving the basement, not even to dress. I was inside quite angry. How did they harm me? We had just been married, intended to begin a fulfilling life in our ideal house. I clenched my fist so tightly that my palm was marked by nails. A wave of anger at Eric swept through me. At all costs, I wanted to catch them having an affair. For that, I made the decision to take urgent action. I immediately called Eric's aunt and uncle, who live close, as well as my parents and in-laws. I wanted to show them the new house when I told them. Relatives and family rushed over. Given that they had already scheduled a visit for today, my parents and in-laws in particular appeared to be well prepared. In addition, Eric's family showed up and I felt content within. I appreciate everyone's attendance. Please settle in, albeit there are still some boxes available. I smiled broadly as I led everyone around the new house, concealing the rage of retaliation that was raging within of me. What a lovely house. You live in such a magnificent home, which I never thought possible. The Simpson family is responsible for everything. No. I didn't assist at all because I left Eric in charge of the new house. Yes, exactly. Our son and Kelly took out a mortgage to build this house. We are appreciative that our daughter-in-law is such a lovely woman. The parents merrily walked throughout the upper rooms, complimenting each other humbly. Ben went down to the ground floor. According to Eric, this house has a special chamber. My uncle said. That's correct indeed. Eric even boasted to us about it. I pounded my fist in my head while my aunt laughed in response. I'm glad my uncle and aunt were aware of Eric's pride in this place. Yes, particularly the basement, which Eric carefully planned out. Now, let me show you. With everyone present, I escorted them to the basement via the stairs. I could hear her lovely voice, and it seemed like the affair between Eric and the unidentified woman was still going on. This is the basement that Eric paid special attention to. Go inside, please. I flipped the key and threw the door wide, slamming it open to expose the scene everyone had been waiting for. What? What is this? When my father-in-law saw his son's shameful actions, he cried out in amazement. Eric and the woman halted in disbelief, still embracing when they finally noticed us. My parents are here, but why? My aunt, uncle, and Kelly, too? Keep your eyes off of us. When we stumbled upon this situation, we wanted to yell, but they panicked. Both of you. Why are you here? With a flushed face, my mother-in-law screamed. My parents were speechless, too shocked to say anything. Hold on. Pay attention to me. Eric made an effort to explain himself, but his words were ineffective in this circumstance, and he stammered. Hello? That woman doesn't work for our organization. Does she see the face of the woman? When our employee was mentioned, my father-in-law grumbled in response. The woman placed a blanket over her head and appeared startled. Observing her response, my father-in-law gave Eric a startled look. Is that woman employed by the business? My father-in-law was questioned. His voice trembled as he nodded. Indeed. She is one of our recent hires. What? Confused, I cried out. New hires were typically 18 years old if they had recently finished high school, or 22 if they had just graduated from college. Around May of this year, Eric had suggested building this house, I remembered. He was enthused about building the basement at the moment and about buying big storage containers in a bed with an unknown function. I had assumed it was his special hobbies and desire for a future family, but after piecing together the facts, it appeared like something else entirely. Around that time, our private existence as a couple came to an end, and he began arriving home late because he was busy. Foon. Perhaps you started an affair right away when you met this new employee in April. You needed a large bed and storage to enjoy your rendezvous, so you decided to build a basement to covertly bring her in. Here, I addressed Eric with my long-held doubts. Kelly, it's not like that. In addition to being a place for hobbies, The basement might also be utilized for storage. The furnishings was my choice. Considering the future, his justifications seemed weak and pathetic. Like the ebbing tide, I felt the affection I had for him fading quickly, just to be stored. Did you have a certain basement in mind? I had faith in your enthusiasm for our ideal house. I ultimately consented to the basement because of this. However, given the current circumstances, don't you think it's irrational to expect me to trust you? Unable to answer, Eric cast his gaze downward. I never thought that my husband's affair with a younger lady would be such a betrayal of our new life in this much anticipated house. It seemed as if my heart were being ripped apart. Are you aware of what you did? Having a sexual relationship with your employer who is 10 years your senior? You're a brave person? After removing the blanket, I covered her head and looked directly into her eyes. She looked worried and replied, I didn't know Eric was married, with tears in her eyes. My father-in-law, however, would not allow it. That isn't feasible. The firm is aware that Eric is married. We recently made the announcement in the business newsletter. Since you're new, you can attempt to pretend ignorance. Even so, given this large home, do you believe that claiming ignorance would be a valid defense? Given that they had been discovered together in the cellar, the lady let out a short cry of terror as she struggled to come up with an explanation. It seemed pointless to provide any justification. I will. It isn't accurate. Jennifer was really unaware that I was solely to blame. Don't blame her, please. Desperately, Eric stood up for her. In a time where I was most harmed, he made me completely hate him. Stop insulting people. Eric ought to be defending his wife, right? Not his lover? The identical response was given by my parents, in-laws, and other family members. Their disapproving faces hardened. Eric was taken aback by the seriousness of the situation, finally recognizing that no one was on his side. At last, the other woman started weeping. What should we do at this point? A little consideration should make it obvious, yet I find it hard to comprehend the audacity to deceive so readily. Yes, Kelly. This was only a brief oversight. Let's start again from the beginning and make amends. I can't possibly fall in love with a young woman like her, can I? It was only a brief affair. We were speechless as we opened our lips in surprise at what Eric had spoken. His abrupt disclosure caused the woman next him, who had been sobbing and shaking, to go pale with astonishment. I had the impression that I was witnessing Eric's own self, as I witnessed his frantic attempt to save his own life. In such a circumstance, who would consider mending a connection with him? Eric's level of naivete is simply perplexing. How can you say anything like that? You truly have no empathy for other people. I believed that we would have a great life together in this house starting today. You wrecked that too. You now consider a brief moment of poor judgment to be an excuse. You were also impolite, not only to me, but also to her. I wish you had realized the dangers of adultery. If you intend to do so, be ready to sacrifice everything in order to keep her safe. I was immature, which is why. He is still unable to comprehend his role. His attitude upset me even more. My father-in-law expressed his disapproval of Eric's pointless actions as well. Will you listen quietly? Why are you acting so frivolously? Kelly should get your heartfelt apologies first. As the pinnacle of stupidity, shouldn't your primary concern be protecting yourself? My father-in-law's powerful presence overpowered everyone. This is not how I brought up my son. A future president of the corporation cannot be someone who is inhumane and incapable of discriminating between right and evil. And you're fired, miss, with effect from now. This abrupt statement left both Eric and the woman speechless. Hold on, Dad. Don't remove me from my job. Any employment will do for me. Simply rethink that section. Please, said Eric. And the woman went on quickly. President, I'm so very sorry. I was fired for something like this, and as a recent graduate, I landed a job at a corporation I could boast about to my parents. What are they going to say? Being transferred doesn't bother me. I implore you, just don't fire me. The two pleaded fervently for my father-in-law's pardon. But my father-in-law's face remained unchanged, and it was obvious that their remarks had no effect whatsoever on him. There was a moment of stillness, then he took a big breath and scolded them. You as well. You're expressing regret to the incorrect person. Kelly is the one you ought to apologize to. I can't trust you with the future of Simpson Corporation if you can't even comprehend to whom you should apologize. You get it? The two shouted and held on to each other when they finally got their final warning. Despite the pathetic appearance of their forms, I felt nothing more. Could you please go now if you understand? With indifference, I said, I'm sorry, Kelly. This is how I'm apologizing. Please, Eric pleaded. I sincerely hope you will pardon me. The woman apologized fervently as well. I stared at them and said, Stop insulting people, as they clung shamelessly without offering a true apology. Go now. Maybe they knew I was serious. After being shocked, the two hurried out of the house. The rest of us just stared at one another, attempting to relax. While I'm still upset with Eric, my in-laws have apologized to me and my parents several times. I sincerely appreciate my in-laws, and I made a commitment to begin a new life going forward. We later got divorced, and I was able to get Eric to pay me a sizable settlement. Even yet, Eric came from a rich household. He didn't have the money to pay the settlement all at once without his parents' assistance. As said, he would probably have to pay back his obligations going ahead. In addition to dismissing Eric and the lady from the firm, my father-in-law chose to keep Eric out of the Simpson family until the very end. His father rejected Eric when he appeared to cling to him, saying, I can't entrust Simpson Corporation to someone like you. In the end, my father-in-law trusted a capable subordinate to take over the business. Eric lacked the traits of a president, although I did overlook some things since he was my son. My father-in-law quietly evaluated Eric. As impressive as the head of a large corporation, Eric acquired our previous new house, so I made the decision to move out. It is preferable to leave a place with only unpleasant memories. Eric would be responsible for paying back the mortgage on the new house because he was the owner. However, he would most likely be having financial difficulties due to his current unemployment. However, the woman left Eric after finding out that he was no longer the heir. In the end, she most likely only wanted Eric's money. When you consider it, having a high-risk affair with a man who is 10 years her senior makes sense. The advantages were few. Naturally, I also demanded a fair compensation from her. The requirement to repay the settlements would follow both of them while they were unemployed. Eric severed his relationship with his girlfriend, lost his wife and career, and was now heavily indebted. I have no sympathy for him. He was alone responsible for this. I'm not sure how Eric will bounce back without his dad's help, but I hope he never comes in front of me again. After that, I relocated to a rental apartment that was ideal for living alone so that I could begin a new life with my favorite furnishings. I'm content with my free existence. I also love interacting with my coworkers, and I've met someone who piques my curiosity. I will have a detailed conversation with my partner and construct a home if I ever decide to get married again. On that, we both concur. That's what I'm going to do.